I'm going to be talking to a guy called Suresh Rajan. You've probably heard of him. He used to be the president of the Ethnic Communities Council of WA. He's also now the president of the National Ethnic Disability Alliance. He travels around doing this kind of work all around Australia. He is a financial planner, an accountant, and an economics commentator. He writes for The Stringer, and he's always got a few angry letters published in the West Australian. When the little guy's under attack, Suresh Rajan comes in with his ethnic cape on and helps everybody out. Hi Suresh, welcome to my crazy abode in Vic Park, the land of the drug dealers and the ethnics, the best place to be. Alright, this is the first episode in the second season of the Leah Show, and I have people in my house to interview, and I've got Suresh here. Now Suresh, I want you to cast your mind back to the 26th of July. You and I were standing on, what was it, Harvest Street in Perth?
Yes, in West Perth, Solidarity Park, I think.
Yeah, Solidarity Park.
Right,
it's that great park, yeah. In the what was it, the revolution of the 90s, a bunch of comrades built Solidarity Park, put in a barbecue, we had a few beers back in the day. But yeah, we had some crazy reclaimers that we had to go and talk to. So the Reclaim Australia movement, in fact, if you've been living under a rock, I'll just explain. There are a bunch of people who need to reclaim Australia from a bunch of other people in Australian society. I'm not really sure who they want to reclaim it from, but I think Suresh has got an idea. Suresh, what's your standout memory of that counter-protest?
Look, I think there were a number of issues. One of the things that disturbed me greatly was the fact that part of the Reclaim group, they had tried to legitimise their position by getting people from the ethnic communities, the multicultural communities, the culturally and linguistically diverse communities onto their side. So they managed to get people like the Free West Papua movement involved there. They managed to get a couple of people of Aboriginal descent, certainly in the eastern states in Melbourne and Sydney. They garnered support from some of the Indian communities, some of the Chinese communities. Danny Nalaya from the Rise Up Australia party was there in Melbourne. So what they tried to do was to try and legitimise their position by saying, hey, we're not just about white people not wanting the Muslims here or not wanting particular groups here. We're very inclusive. We've got all these other people who come and join us as well. So that was what remained as an overriding memory of that event. The other thing that struck me was that all of the people on the protest side were largely people who were from the mainstream community. And it disappointed me a little bit that the multicultural communities were not strong in their representation there. You and I were possibly some of the very few people who were there from the multicultural communities. And I would hope that people will see that the message that Reclaim is putting out is of danger to the wider multicultural community. And it's important that if they have another protest of this nature or another rally of this nature, that we should have the multicultural communities out there in force. I think there are a number of issues around multicultural communities and attendance at rallies and so on, because there is always a fear that rallies can get a little bit violent and so on. But, you know, in the last few days, we've seen a whole host of celebrities saying that Reclaim Australia do not represent them and they're not allowed to use their music. So we've had John Farnham, we've had Jimmy Barnes, we've had Midnight Oil. You know, we're really at the stage where all of the high-profile musicians have said, these guys do not represent our position, they do not represent a tolerant and harmonious society, and now it's time for the multicultural communities also to step up and join us, you and me and a few others who are there, to say that this is not acceptable. their targets appear to be very much around the Muslim community. There's no question that what they want to stop is the issues around halal certification. They want to stop the building of mosques. They appear to try and use a lot of emotive language to try and decry the issue of halal and decry the issue of the building of mosques, etc. So it is a very targeted group that they're aiming at now. It's very much the Muslim community. And unfortunately, they're getting some traction in the multicultural communities, which they shouldn't, because they really are a group that just do not want anyone from multicultural communities to be here. They are very much a white Anglo-Celtic and a white supremacist group.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about these guys. They remind me of the Pauline Hanson push, back in the day. And in fact, I remember, I think you were around at that time in those rallies. Yeah, so was I. And this is before I became a Muslim. And they did this co-opting of ethnic communities. And until those ethnic communities figured out that they would be the next people targeted, it was... Yeah.
Look, I think what's also worrying is that when we look across the board at all of the rallies that occurred in Australia, one of the other major concerns I have is the legitimacy that's given to them by people like George Christensen, the Member of Parliament. I mean, that man should not have been at that rally, but that man has form. Every one of his pronouncements in this area have been totally and utterly racist. There is no question about that. What I find intriguing is that we have a parliamentary system and a Prime Minister that takes to task or does not allow his parliamentarian colleagues to go on to an ABC-funded program because Zaki Malala might be there, but he's prepared to allow George Christensen to go to a rally that is so anti-Islam that is completely inappropriate. I think that is a real concern. So we need to address those sorts of issues. So those are the overriding concerns I have. I think that this could also spawn other groups. And we know that Reclaim, post the rally in Brisbane, had a breakup with some of its groups. Some of its group went out and went back to the United Defence Front, and so that's another group that we need to be concerned about. So there are a few Patriot alliances, etc., that we need to be concerned about. But this sort of group, and I must say that the one in Perth was probably better attended by the racists than most of the other groups. The other ones in Melbourne and Sydney, they were possibly more anti-racist than they were racist. But in WA, we had more racists than we had anti-racist. So that's a concern. Does that show that there is a hotbed of racism running through Western Australia? Possibly it does, but it also does show that these guys really went under the radar. For a long time, I know, we'd been talking to media about trying to talk about this rally before the rally occurred, but the media was loath to because they did not want to give these guys oxygen. What it did do, by not recognizing them, was that it created such a groundswell on that side that it gave them oxygen anyway. Whereas, had we talked about it beforehand, we would have got more of the multicultural communities involved in saying, this is not acceptable.
So the multicultural communities were aware of these guys, though, weren't they? I mean, they've been recruiting members on Facebook like mad, and you've got a lot of pages that have sprung up in opposition to these guys. And so it must be in people's news feeds, and
I think there's also quite a difference from being on a Facebook page and being a keyboard warrior, and being out at a rally. It's all very well. Even on their side, for example, on the Reclaim side, if you looked at the numbers that are on their Facebook pages, we're talking in the thousands of people. Yet at any of these events, you'll probably only get a couple of hundred people, 300, 400, maybe up to 500. But I think at the time here, I think we might have got about 600 people here in Perth on that particular Sunday, which was a concern.
So what made you, in particular, as a person, attend this protest, maybe as opposed to doing other forms of action?
Yeah. Look, it's a very long time since I've been to any rally. I've steadfastly refused to go to rallies because rallies have tended to get out of hand, and they've tended to be fairly, to end up with violence occurring at different times and so on. So I've tended to stay out of that. What concerned me about this particular one was that there are a couple of things. One, a number of my friends were asking me to come there because they felt that that would give some kind of, drawing power to our side, hoping that some of my friends would come along as well. And it also gave, some show to the other side that, look, there are people who are reasonably prominent in the multicultural community who are standing up here and saying this is not acceptable. So that was one reason. But the other reason was that, look, I had been watching these guys for a long time, and I guess I'd been concerned about the growth in the numbers, and I was beginning to think that, it wasn't like a Pauline Hanson rally, and I attended most of those rallies. And look, Pauline Hanson at her best attracted 10% of the vote. We know that there's 10% of the population that harbours racist views. That has been found again and again by studies that have been done by Kevin Dunn, Professor Kevin Dunn in University of New South Wales has done a heap of studies around that, indicating that about 10% of our population has embedded racist views and tendencies towards Aboriginal people, refugees, and people from a non-English speaking background. So we know that that also reflects in the vote that is received by someone like a Pauline Hanson, someone like a Reverend Fred Nile, so people like that. But to me, what I was seeing was that this was a group that was attracting possibly more than 10% would attract more than 10% of the vote, but it also was attracting and trying to attract people from the multicultural community. So they're actually very smart. They're very, very good in doing that. In Hanson's case, yes, she did attract one or two recalcitrant people from the different communities, but this one had a much more involved group. There were people who were reasonably high. And for example, when I look at some of the things that someone like a Free West Papua group that was trying to achieve, for them to be attracted to the reclaim community really concerned me, because once their usefulness had expired to the reclaim community, they were going to be dropped. They were going to be the next people that were going to be targeted by the reclaim group. So we needed to emphasize that. And when the minister came out afterwards and said that we're going to run these programs to teach people about Islam so that we will reduce this, my view, and I wrote to the newspapers about that, was to say, look, you've got to be very, very targeted about this. There is no use in trying to change the view of people who have entrenched racist views. The people on Reclaim Australia have entrenched racist views. They are not going to change from their views. Leave them alone. Don't bother trying to teach them. What you've got to do is teach people who are wavering and vacillating between joining them and not joining them. People from the multicultural communities, people from the Aboriginal communities, etc. So you get them to come on board and say, look, this is not acceptable. Their view is for a society that is not going to be tolerant and not going to be harmonious, and that's not acceptable in current day Australia.
Yeah. They sort of strike me as being slightly brown shirty, in that they're the shock troops. And there's a lot of risible examples of them being supposedly very bad at spelling and grammar, and we put them down and everything. And everybody has a great laugh, and this is almost like a red herring, because I have a real feeling, and I'm probably wrong, but I'm probably right, that there are more powerful people pulling the strings behind the scenes. Where do you think these groups get their funding from, and what are they a front for?
Look, I think that there is no question that most of these groups are spawned from the English Defence League, the Australian Defence League, and the Patriots Defence League. Those three groups are groups that we have massive concerns about. I watch what they do. They're clearly anti-Islam. Look, there's another group as well, the Q Society, which also, at various times has chosen to attack some of the work that I've done in this area as well, particularly around halal certification. So there are groups like that, I think, and in England, most of those groups are actually funded by the neo-Nazi groups. So, if you track back to where this funding is coming from, it is the neo-Nazis, it's the people who are wanting to take us back to a 1950s white Australia policy. So there's a fair degree of support and funding. Now, in Britain, of course, we've also got UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, which I must say I was pleased to see got absolutely slaughtered in the last election. But, there are people there, and I can't remember the guy's name, but Nick, whatever his name is.
Is it Nigel Farage?
Nigel Farage, that's the one. Someone like him, who really didn't get any traction in the election, and that gave me some comfort that people were starting to turn there. But I think if you look back at if you look at the ADL and the PDL, the Australian Defence League and the Patriots Defence League, they get a lot of their comfort from the English Defence League, and the English Defence League gets its action from the neo-Nazi group. So again, also if you look in terms of Western Australia, another group that you'd want to be looking out for would be Stormfront Down Under. Stormfront is an offshoot of Stormfront Down Under is an offshoot of Stormfront from America. Again, very, very neo-Nazi, very, they if you go on to their blogs, and I make it a point to have a look through their work there, they all have these lovely avatars that are incredibly Nazi. They have things like Panzer Shrek and Steel Cat Boot and stuff like that. They're humorous, but look, and there's an underlying hatred there that is beyond those things that you pointed out, the risible stuff, the misspellings and so on. There is an underlying streak of violence in that group, and that's the concern I have. Once that takes hold of the entire group, what you're going to see is some really major backlash against the multicultural community, starting from the Muslim community and working up. Look, I think the other thing that drove me to this particular rally was when I saw what they were doing in terms of the parading people in burqas and niqabs and so on.
Yes.
And I just found that completely unacceptable. I have an account amongst a number of my friends, people who wear the hijab, and I've spoken with many of them on numerous occasions to understand what is it that causes or drives people to want to wear a hijab or a niqab or burqa. And my view has come to this position where you cannot generalize in terms of why people wear it, because every individual has their own reasons.
Yeah.
So until I can get to the person, and I dealt with, I think it was Tasneem, who wanted to wear the burqa at the giving of evidence in a court case. And, when I talked to her and I discovered that here was a very, very was a wonderfully intelligent, eloquent lady who chose to wear it because she felt closer to God with that. My view was that, well, what's the problem? So, having done that path of addressing that, I then found that whole depiction was just so totally against everything I understood that I thought they cannot be allowed to do this. They cannot be allowed to parade these women, and supposedly women, we have no idea who they were, but also these people who claim to have been beheaded, and as you
and their heads were miraculously had popped back up.
Back on.
Yes, yes,
First head trans.
I stand with Adam.
I and the Labor Party that I lead stand with Adam Goods.
Adam, you've stood up against racism, and now it's time for all of us to stand with you. I stand with Adam Goods because there's no place for racism.
I stand with Adam Goods.
Thank goodness for people like Adam Goods, willing to stand up and speak out wherever they see racism. We should all be doing the same.
So Suresh, what do you think has been the most notable reaction from, the fallout from the Adam Goods saga?
A couple of things. I think what it has done is brought to the surface some latent racism that has existed in the community. We're now seeing a lot of justification. We're seeing a lot of people talking about what has happened, etc. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. I suspect it's not a good thing. I would prefer that we deal with it rather than simply have this latent racism being brought to the surface. However, it has also brought out some reaction which I think has pleased me. The Sydney Swans yesterday had a banner as the players were coming in. The banner just had one word on it. It said respect. And I thought that was really fantastic. Lewis Jetta performed a dance yesterday when he kicked a goal. Excellent. Again, it was to say, I'm allowed to do this. This is my land. I thought that was fantastic. What also struck me was the social media campaign to say, I stand with Adam, and I think that's been very, very good. A lot of people have changed their profile pictures to show that and so on. And it also has, I think, what struck me the most, and I think was the most comforting thing, I think, was a whole bunch of kids in the Gama community, Aboriginal community, and as they were going in to play their game, they were without shirts on, they were tiny little kids, and they had the number 37 painted on their backs. Yeah. That was just the most beautiful thing to see, because, there are a whole lot of interviews that are online that talk about the status of someone like an Adam Goods in the wider Aboriginal community. Leave aside the football community, the wider Aboriginal community. Noel Pearson has said that we are standing at the abyss of racism because of this event. We've seen Mick Gooder, very good friend of mine. Mick has indicated he's one of the Human Rights Commissioners for Aboriginal Affairs. Mick's from WA, lovely, gorgeous man. He also pointed out that this has brought to the surface a level of racism that we haven't seen for a number of years. Whether it's a good thing, whether we can now deal with it and move on, that's going to be the big issue now. Can we as a nation, are we mature enough to say, it is there, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this and move on? Because if we don't deal with it and move on, we'll allow it to fester to another time, and we will do exactly the same thing. This is no different to what Nicky Widmar did back a few years ago, what Michael O'Loughlin did, what Cathy Freeman did.
There was a lot of fallout from what they did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In none of those cases did we deal with it and walk on with it. Nicky Widmar's case, in my view, was incredibly important because, when he stood there and lifted up his shirt and pointed to his black skin and showed people that he was proud of his Aboriginality, that to me was the first, really important line in the sand that had been drawn in a very, very public way. This is the second line in the sand that's been drawn. It is now up to us as a nation to deal with it. Are we mature enough? I don't know that we are. I think that we need to see a lot of leadership from the political parties, the political people in power, etc., to say, let's deal with this issue and how do we deal with it. And my view is that the only way we're going to deal with this is with dialogue. We need to just reopen the dialogue. We opened the dialogue at the Sorry, when the Sorry event occurred, when Kevin Rudd apologised. And then things have just fallen into a rut since then.
We're closing down of communities. It seems to me that the structural racism is probably the bigger thing. Booing of Adam Goods is basically, it's a symptom of the illness. And it seems that nobody's really seeming to pay attention to the refugee problem that we have with Aboriginal people being forced off their lands. And this crazy idea that Aboriginal people are not somehow entitled to the same stuff that other people in Australia take for granted in the cities. I mean, it's the same with the farmers, you know. Like we carry on about, you know, farmers, you know, being out there and it costs a lot to provide services to them. But at the end of the day, they have to have them.
Yes.
And they get a better hearing than Aboriginal people. We've still got people sticking their nose into Aboriginal people's business a lot of the time. And you know, and what remedy is for them? What is out there for them? Do you have anything else that you want to add to this conversation?
Look, I think that, you know, I touched on it earlier, was in regard to the Q Society and the formation of the Australian Liberty Alliance. Look, my concern there lies in the formation of a political party. I'm hoping that the level of racism that's been identified, the 10%, will be the extent of the vote they get. My sense is that in the current climate, it's probably going to be slightly more than that, because they're going to get disenfranchised and disenchanted other communities as well. So I think that we need to do that. The other thing that we also need to be, is we need to be mindful of this group, and we need to be mindful that they are essentially running on a racist platform. The other thing that we need to also concentrate a lot of our efforts on is the issue around children and the integration of communities into the wider community. I think that one of the things that we haven't done well in this state is, in fact, right across the country, is this issue of how do we make people feel that they are an important part of the community and therefore valued in that community. If we don't do it with the children, then we are actually creating a group of people who are disenfranchised.
Yes.
Disenfranchised children, or disenfranchised adults who come out of disenfranchised children, are going to be a problem for the I guess the harmony in society, the cohesion in society.
Yeah.
And that could happen in any group, that could happen in any community. That's what we as a community should be concentrating our efforts on. If we do that, we will have a society that is very, very cohesive and very harmonious.
Well, let's hope that we can make that a reality. So the action steps you can suggest to our audience in order to fight this continual problem that we have in Australia, and to make Australia a more cohesive and happy nation.
I think, look, one of the things that has always been a principle in my view is that racism is bred out of ignorance, and that ignorance is about someone else's cultural values. That ignorance is about that person's cultural norms, cultural mores. So my view is that we need to inform each other. We need to actually educate each other as to what is my way of living. Multiculturalism is, in my view, your basic human right. It is my human right to practice my Indianness or my Singaporeanness or whatever it may be. It is not about whether it's different. It's about the fact that I'm able to practice it myself, but I need to include you in that celebration.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Suresh.
Not at all.